why should other countries too trust these BRICS countries not to issue more money tokens than they have gold backing it? This, for example, as we've talked about, is what the U.S. did to the world in the 1960s when we printed more U.S. dollars to pay for Vietnam and welfare projects, guns and butter. Then we had gold to back it. France then sent over a warship in the late 60s to exchange their U.S. dollars for gold, and then Nixon had to fold and close the gold convertibility window in 1971, and this was the birth of the modern fiat money era. Gold's basic physical properties ensure that all attempts and reattempts at a gold standard will end badly. In fact, the gold standard actually started failing well before 1971 when Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. We had a lot of countries loosely going off the gold standard in order to finance World War I. And we also had Executive Order 6102 in 1933 when President Franklin Roosevelt confiscated common Americans' gold. And if it was sitting in a bank, the U.S. government confiscated it. If it wasn't sitting in a bank, you had to turn it in. And some people went to jail or had very high fines if they didn't do this. What they basically did is they would buy your gold from you for, I believe it was something like $20 an ounce. And then as soon as the U.S. government had collected as much gold as they could, they revalued it to $33 an ounce. And in this way, really stole from the American people. And this is how the gold ended up in Fort Knox, assuming that it's actually still there. So this was an early example of the gold standard already breaking and the government doing funny business with it, even before 1971. The two fundamental problems with gold are the problems of custody or storage and transportation. So for example, custody, it's nice to have a safe place to store your gold besides your house, and especially if you have a certain amount of wealth, storing in your house becomes increasingly impractical and turns your house into a honeypot. But using a third-party custodian like a bank to store your gold introduces counterparty risk. The bank may not redeem your gold when you want it, or the government may steal it in an Executive Order 6102-like situation. When it comes to transportation, it's also not practical for quite wealthy people to move their gold across space. And this is the problem with gold. A system based on physical gold will always devolve into a system of paper IOUs, digital or paper IOUs, simply because of gold's physical properties. And people who suggest a return to the gold standard must not understand this. Here's another way that gold fails, another gold failure mode. I pay my bank an annual fee to store my physical gold. And as I said, if you're really wealthy with physical gold, the only two options are using a bank or some other security setup like that, or creating a small private army, having your own castle, etc., which comes with its own problems, because then you have to worry about the army turning on you and killing you when you sleep, and you have to worry about paying them, and it can become very expensive, etc., etc. So that gets complicated very quickly. We can see why there was market demand for banks to store gold and other things. But this is what happens. This is another gold failure mode. If that bank where I'm storing my gold and I'm paying them an annual fee, maybe I'm paying them 1% of the value of the gold to store it for 1 year. If that bank has a competitor that instead lends out its depositors gold for a fee, then that competitor bank is able to offer a reduced or zero annual storage fee. So I'm currently storing my gold at 1% a year. Maybe I'll move it to this competitor bank where they will store it for me for free or for 0.5% a year. And in this way, those competitor banks will steal all the business from the conservative banks that are very careful with the gold and don't lend it out. And then you'll end up with a system where you only have partial reserve gold banks, where all of them are lending out to other banks in order to earn interest income to subsidize the storage costs and gain market share. And when this happens, if you have a situation like an economic contraction, and a lot of people ask for their gold at the same time in this context of a fractional reserve gold banking system, you end up with widespread bank failures. And that's when the calls go out and the people say, we really need someone to bail out or stabilize the banking system. This is how you recreate central banks. And this is in fact what historically happened roughly, and it could certainly happen again if we were to move back to a gold standard. And by doing this, this is what you've done. You started off with something very nice and decentralized like gold, but because of its lack of portability and the difficulty of storage, you've eventually reinvented the paper banking system, and you've reinvented central banks. And in doing so, you put your money into the control of a very small group of people who may start out being very ethical and above board, but will eventually do very stupid and corrupt things and will be co-opted by the government to fund deficit spending, as we're seeing in the U.S. and so many other countries now, where the central bank is complicit and works and colludes with the U.S. Treasury to print up money, buy their debt, and thus fund endless wars and endless deficit spending, running up the debt, the national debt of the U.S. in the process.